It wasn't the kind of thing you expect at a doctor's office. "Don't go home. Run." The words were whispered so quietly, but they hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember standing there, frozen, in the sterile white room, the doctor's eyes wide with urgency. He handed me a note, a scrap of paper, torn from a pad. My hands trembled as I read it, my mind racing. Why would he say such a thing? Was he worried for my safety? Or did he know something I didn't? My whole body went cold, and all I could think was that my life had just taken a sharp turn, and it wouldn't be the same again. Before I tell you what happened next, would you do me a favor? Hit that subscribe button, turn on the little bell, and let me know where you're watching from. It really helps us know where these stories are reaching. My name is Mabel. I'm 72 years old, living in a small town in Arkansas. You could call me an old-fashioned woman, one who loves her quiet mornings with a cup of coffee and the sound of birds chirping outside. I've spent most of my life taking care of my family, raising my children, and making sure everyone was fed, clothed, and safe. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that one day, a simple visit to the doctor would throw my world upside down. But that's exactly what happened. That note, that warning, those words changed everything. And what followed? Well, you'll have to hear it to believe it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The doctor's words kept echoing in my head, haunting me. I didn't go home that day. Instead, I drove around town, trying to make sense of everything. But the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. My husband, Richard, had always been a man of few words, but I trusted him. We had built a life together, raised children, worked hard, and made a home. What could he possibly be hiding from me? What could be so dangerous that the doctor needed to warn me? I spent the next few days digging through old family records, calling relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, hoping to find some clue. And then, there it was. A letter. Not from Richard, but from a lawyer, dated years ago, before our kids were born. The letter was short, formal, and completely out of place. It was addressed to Richard, and it talked about a large sum of money being transferred to an offshore account. No explanation, no further details. Just that. And the strange thing was, I'd never seen it before. I've always handled the bills, the family finances. Richard had never once mentioned this. The more I read, the more the pieces started to fall into place. I wasn't just looking at a simple mistake, a forgotten document. This was something planned, something big. But what? And why had Richard kept this from me all these years? I made a decision. I wasn't going to stop until I had the answers. But even as I made that decision, I knew that what I was about to uncover would change everything. The next morning, I sat across from my son, Jonathan, at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I hadn't told anyone what I'd found, didn't want to cause a stir just yet. But something in my gut told me Jonathan knew more than he was letting on. He was always the quiet one, the one who kept his cards close to his chest. But today, his face looked different. Tense. Like he was carrying a secret. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice soft but firm. I froze. I could feel my heart racing, like I already knew where this was going. "I wish I could have told you earlier, but I didn't know how." I put the letter down on the table. My fingers gripped it tightly, my knuckles white. "Jonathan, what's going on? What is your father hiding from me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at the table, his hands fidgeting nervously. Finally, he looked up at me, and there was something in his eyes, a mixture of guilt and sorrow that I couldn't ignore. "Mom, it's worse than you think. Dad's been hiding something for years. And I've known about it. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth is." His voice broke off, and for a moment, I thought I might lose my breath. "Your husband? He's not the man you think he is. He's been involved in something criminal. Something dangerous. And I couldn't let you know." I could barely hear him through the buzzing in my ears. Richard, my husband, the man I'd spent over 30 years with, he wasn't just lying to me. He was living a double life, one that I knew nothing about. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. I felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away. How had I been so blind? How had I never seen it? I looked at Jonathan, tears welling up in my eyes. "How long have you known, Jonathan? How long has this been going on?" Years, Mom, he said quietly. I didn't want to hurt you. But I couldn't hide it anymore. He's in deep with people. Dangerous people. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I needed answers. And I needed them fast. Richard had made a choice to betray me, to betray our family. And now, I would make him pay for it. I couldn't sit still after Jonathan's confession. Every word he said gnawed at me like a hungry animal. Dangerous people. My mind kept circling back to those words, but I had no clue who they were or what my husband had gotten himself into. What was more, I didn't know how far this went or how deep Richard's lies went into our life. I had to find out. I had to uncover every detail before anyone else did. So, I did what I've always done when I needed answers, dig through the past. The next day, I headed to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the desk knew me by name, and after some pleasantries, I got what I needed: public records, transfers, property deeds, and any financial dealings linked to my husband's name. I sat down in the back of the small office, the papers scattered in front of me. My heart sank as I flipped through them. There it was, tucked away among other seemingly innocent paperwork, a bank transfer, one large enough to make my blood run cold. It was from an account I had no knowledge of, to a name I didn't recognize. The sum was staggering, far beyond what Richard could have earned in his life. I traced the name to an overseas bank, a shell account tied to an anonymous company. It all seemed so calculated, so carefully hidden. Why had Richard kept this from me? What was he trying to cover up? The more I stared at the papers, the clearer it became: this wasn't a simple mistake. This was a carefully crafted deception. And I was in the dark, but now, I wasn't just in the dark, I was furious. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust. About betrayal. Richard had betrayed not only me but everything we'd built together. The comfortable life I thought we had was a lie. It wasn't just his life at stake anymore. It was mine too. And that meant that whatever he had done, whatever he'd gotten involved in, it was now my problem. I sat back in my chair, looking over the papers one last time. My mind raced with thoughts of revenge. I had to make him pay for this. But more than that, I needed to make sure that the people he'd hurt, whether they were strangers or someone close to us, would never do it again. That night, I began plotting my next move. No more waiting. No more excuses. The truth was coming out, and Richard would answer for every single thing he had done. By the time I sat down with Richard that evening, I knew more than I ever wanted to. The documents, the accounts, everything I had uncovered, there was no going back now. He could no longer hide behind his excuses or his charm. I was done with the lies. It was time for the truth, and it was time for him to pay. Richard, we need to talk, I said, my voice calm but laced with an edge. I could see the nervousness creeping into his posture, but he tried to mask it with his usual smile. About what, Mabel? His voice was too casual, as though nothing had changed. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew something was coming. I didn't waste time. The bank accounts. The money. The lies. I threw the papers in front of him. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. His face went pale as he scanned the documents. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, or try to talk his way out of it. But instead, he just looked at me, his face slowly crumbling. I didn't want you to find out, Mabel, he muttered. I didn't want to bring you into this. It was supposed to be over. It was supposed to stay buried. I leaned forward, my hands clenched. So you thought you could keep this hidden forever? You thought you could lie to me, to our children, to everyone we knew? What kind of man does that? He shook his head, his eyes filled with regret, but it wasn't just regret. There was something darker in them, something cold. You don't understand, Mabel. These people. They don't let you walk away. They don't let you go. You don't have a choice once you're in. My stomach churned. Who are they, Richard? What have you done? His silence spoke louder than words. He wasn't going to tell me, not without a fight. And I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easy. Don't lie to me anymore, Richard, I said, my voice growing colder. The truth. Right now. With a deep sigh, he finally looked me in the eye. I got involved with a group, Mabel. A group that runs illegal arms deals. I thought I could keep it small, keep it away from the family, but I couldn't. It spiraled out of control. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Illegal arms deals. My husband, the man I thought I knew, had been dealing in weapons. I couldn't breathe for a moment. How had I been so blind? You were right about one thing, Richard, I said, my voice shaking with anger. This is worse than I ever imagined. But now, you're going to pay for it. I stood up, grabbing the papers. I couldn't sit there and let him explain himself. There was no explanation good enough. He had crossed a line. And now, I was going to make sure he faced the consequences. I knew what I had to do next. The people he was involved with, dangerous, ruthless people, had to be exposed. They had to be stopped. And Richard, well, he had a lot to answer for. The days that followed were a blur. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. The walls of my home, once a place of comfort, now felt like they were closing in on me. I had the proof, I had the anger, but I didn't have all the answers. And I needed them, fast. That's when he showed up. I didn't expect him, not in a million years. The knock on the door came late one evening, just as the last light of day slipped away, casting long shadows across the hallway. I opened it, and there he stood, tall, with sharp features and eyes that didn't look at you, but through you. He wasn't someone I recognized. My name is Frank, he said, his voice low, steady. I need to talk to you, Mabel. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. How did he know me? How did he know about Richard? But there was something in his presence, something chilling, that made me step aside and let him in. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way he held himself, the quiet confidence that made me feel like he knew more than I ever would. We sat down in the living room, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Frank didn't waste time. I know what you've found, he said, his eyes narrowing. And I know about your husband's involvement. I felt my heart skip a beat. He knew about Richard, everything. Who are you? I demanded, my voice rising. Let's just say I'm someone who knows how dangerous this all is, Frank replied, leaning forward. Richard wasn't just involved with the wrong people. He's a liability. And right now, you're in danger too. I didn't say anything. My mind was racing. How could this man know all this? How could he have been watching us? Richard owes them money, Mabel. A lot of it, Frank continued. And they don't care who they hurt to get it back. I'm here to offer you a way out. A chance to fix this before it gets worse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Richard had dragged us into something so dark, so dangerous, that even strangers were showing up in my house to offer me an out. Why should I trust you? I asked, every instinct in me screaming that I shouldn't. Frank's face remained neutral. You don't have to trust me. But I know how this ends. If you don't do something about Richard, it's not just him they'll come for, it's you, too. I leaned back in my chair, processing everything he said. A part of me wanted to slam the door in his face and pretend none of this was real. But the other part, the part that had been shaken to its core, knew he was right. Richard had put us all in danger. And now, I had a choice to make, ignore the warning or fight back. You want me to help you take down the people Richard's been working with? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. Frank nodded slowly. That's right. You can expose them, Mabel. You can make them pay. But only if you're willing to do whatever it takes. I took a deep breath. My mind was made up. It was time for Richard, and everyone who had crossed me, to face the consequences of their actions. Then I'll do it, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. But we do this my way. The next few days felt like I was living in someone else's life. Every move I made was calculated, every word I spoke was carefully chosen. I couldn't afford to slip up. Richard had done enough damage. Now it was my turn to right the wrongs, to bring him and everyone involved to justice. Frank and I made our plan. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't safe, but it was necessary. He had connections, people who could help me expose Richard's dealings. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep Richard had dug this hole. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd endangered our children, our home, everything we had. And that wasn't something I could forgive. Not anymore. One evening, Frank took me to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was dimly lit, filled with the scent of oil and metal. I could feel my pulse quicken as we walked deeper into the shadows. This is where the deals went down, Frank explained quietly. This is where Richard's been meeting them. I nodded, my breath shallow. And now we expose it. We show everyone what he's been doing. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. I never imagined I would be standing here, in the heart of my husband's betrayal, planning how to bring it all crashing down. We waited in silence, Frank watching the door, his eyes sharp. The night dragged on, the sound of my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. Then, finally, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was one of the men Richard had been working with, a big man, tough-looking, with a scar running down his cheek. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. Frank's plan was simple: get him talking, get him to confess. I couldn't just stand there, though. I had my own questions, my own anger to unleash. "Do you know who I am?" I asked, my voice low and steady. The man didn't answer, just narrowed his eyes at me. But I didn't care. "I'm the wife of the man who's been lying to all of us. The man who's been dealing weapons with you and your people." The man scoffed. "What do you want, lady? I don't know you, and I don't have time for this." I stepped forward, my heart racing with anger. "What I want is simple. I want the truth. I want to know why my husband is involved in your illegal deals. And I want you to tell me everything he's been hiding." Frank moved behind him, quietly circling. The man tensed up, sensing the danger. He wasn't as confident now. "I don't know anything," the man said, his voice shaking a little. "Richard's been on his own. You're barking up the wrong tree." I could see right through his lies. "You're lying. You know everything. And I'm not leaving until you tell me." Frank's voice cut through the tension. "Mabel's not going anywhere. Not until we get the truth. And you're going to give it to us." The man's expression shifted. He could see there was no way out. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long sigh. "All right. Fine. I'll tell you. Richard's been in this for years. But he wasn't the mastermind. He's just a pawn. We were the ones pulling the strings." My blood ran cold. It was worse than I thought. Richard hadn't just been deceiving me, he'd been a part of something far bigger, something even more dangerous than I could have imagined. And now, it was all unraveling. I grabbed Frank's arm, my mind racing. "We need to take him down, right now. All of them." But before we could make another move, the door slammed open. More men. More danger. I knew then that we weren't walking out of here without a fight. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Richard's betrayal had led me here. And now, I was going to make sure he paid for everything. The moment those men barged in, I knew we were out of time. But there was no turning back now. I had spent my entire life being the dutiful wife, raising our children, keeping our home together. Now, I was standing in a warehouse full of criminals, ready to expose the man I had spent decades with. Richard had betrayed me in a way that I couldn't even begin to understand, and it was time for him to face the consequences. Frank didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, pushing the man who'd spoken first against the wall. "You're going to tell her everything," Frank said, his voice harsh and commanding. The men surrounding us seemed ready to strike, but Frank wasn't fazed. "Tell her, or things are going to get a lot worse for you," he added. The man hesitated, but then nodded, breaking under the pressure. Richard? He was just the middleman. He thought he could get out, but he didn't know the people he was dealing with. They weren't just in arms, they were in everything. Money laundering, drugs, you name it. Richard's in deep. He thought he could get away with it, but now, he's a liability. I felt like the world was crashing down around me. Richard had been dealing with the most dangerous people imaginable, and I had no idea. I had trusted him with everything, my heart, my life, and now I was learning that it had all been a lie. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not now, not ever. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Where's Richard?" The man didn't answer right away. He was trying to figure out if he could lie his way out, but I wasn't having it. "Tell me," I demanded. "Tell me where he is." The man finally spoke. "He's hiding. He's been planning to skip town for days. He knows what he's done, and he's scared. But it's too late for him. It's too late for all of you." I felt the weight of his words sink in, but I didn't flinch. I want him found. I want him brought to justice. Frank glanced at me, his expression grim but resolute. We'll get him, Mabel. But not the way you think. He's going to answer for what he's done, and it's not going to be pretty. The truth had come crashing down in a way I never could have imagined. Richard's betrayal was no longer just about him, it was about the destruction he'd caused, the lives he'd ruined, including mine. But I wasn't just going to stand by and let him get away with it. I turned to Frank, determination in my eyes. Make sure it's done right. No one escapes this time. We left the warehouse, the men following us, their eyes wary. I knew we were walking into dangerous territory, but I also knew that I had to see this through. I couldn't let Richard get away. The consequences were far too great, and now, I had a chance to make things right. The truth had been exposed, and now it was time for justice. The following days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and surveillance. It felt like the entire world had shifted beneath my feet. The secrets, the lies, the betrayal, it was all coming to light, and there was no turning back. Richard, my husband of over 30 years, was on the run, but it wasn't just him I was after anymore. It was everything he had built, everything he had hidden. My children, Jonathan and Sarah, came to me with questions. They had heard whispers, saw the news reports, the police at the house, and they were confused, angry. I could see the hurt in their eyes, the disbelief. I didn't want them to know the whole truth, but I couldn't hide it anymore. You should have told us, Mom, Jonathan said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. His voice was quiet, but the pain in it was clear. You knew something was wrong all these years. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't know, Jonathan, I replied softly. I didn't know what Richard was involved in. But now I do, and I can't stand by and let it all fall apart without doing something about it. Sarah sat next to him, her eyes red from crying. We trusted him, Mom. You trusted him. Her voice trembled as she spoke. How could he do this to us? It hurt. It hurt more than I could put into words. But I couldn't focus on the hurt right now. There were too many people at risk, too many lives affected by Richard's actions. And I needed to make sure that he paid for every lie, every betrayal. The police were closing in on him, but it wasn't enough. I knew Richard was running, but I also knew that he wasn't going to escape this. Not if I had anything to do with it. I met with Frank again, discussing our next steps. We've got him cornered, Frank said, his eyes cold and calculating. He's going to try to leave the country, but we can stop him. I don't want him running away, I said firmly. I want him to answer for what he's done here. I want him to pay for every single thing. Frank nodded. We're going to make sure of that. It wasn't long before Richard's whereabouts were finally traced. He was holed up in a small cabin in the woods, isolated from everyone. The police were on their way, but Frank and I weren't waiting. I wasn't going to let Richard get away. Not after everything he had put us through. We arrived at the cabin, and I could feel the tension in the air. Frank was ready to make his move. But as we approached the door, I paused for a moment. The man I had spent my life with, my partner, my husband, was inside, and he was about to face the consequences of his choices. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I was done being the victim. It was time for Richard to face justice, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. The door creaked open, and there he was. Richard. The man I once loved. The man who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Richard, I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. It's over. You're not getting away this time. He looked at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Mabel, please, he started, but I cut him off. No more lies, Richard. No more excuses. You're going to answer for what you've done. The police arrived shortly after, but it didn't matter anymore. Richard was done running. The truth had caught up with him, and now, he would face the consequences. As they took him away, I watched him with a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This was justice. This was the reckoning he deserved. But there was no joy in it. Only a sense of finality. I had fought for what was right, and now, I could finally close this chapter of my life. I stood there, watching as Richard was led away in handcuffs, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The man I once knew, the man I had built a life with, was now facing the consequences of his own choices. It was a strange feeling, justice, but no satisfaction. Just a heavy, weary relief. The truth had come out, and Richard was going to pay for what he had done. But in the end, it didn't change the years I had lost. It didn't erase the hurt, the lies, or the damage. As I turned away from the scene, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Betrayal, deceit, the darkness I never saw coming, it all came crashing down. But through it all, I had learned something valuable. Justice might not always feel like a victory, but it's necessary. Sometimes, it's not about forgiveness. It's about making sure the right people face the consequences of their actions. I thought about my children, about the future. I had lost my trust in the man I loved, but I had gained something far more important: strength. Strength to face the truth, to fight for what was right, and to rebuild what had been broken. As I walked away, I knew the path ahead would be different. But it would be mine. I had taken control of my own story. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. Before I leave you with this story, would you do me a favor? If you've been following along, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and let me know where you're watching from. Your support means the world, and I'm so glad we could share this journey together. Thank you for being here.